Snow fell over Boston like silent confetti that night, turning the city into a glittering postcard no one was awake to see. Inside a glass penthouse overlooking the harbor, billionaire Ethan Marshall sat alone beside a table set for two. The other chair was empty, just like every Christmas Eve since his divorce. He had everything money could buy: private jets, oceanfront villas, a company worth billions, but not the one thing he secretly longed for: a family that stayed. When the clock struck midnight, he poured his untouched wine into the sink, grabbed his coat and walked out into the cold, without knowing he was about to meet someone who would change his life forever. If you believe that miracles can still happen to broken hearts, stay until the end of this story, because what happened next will leave you breathless. Ethan walked aimlessly through the snow-covered streets of downtown Boston. The world outside sparkled, but he felt nothing but the hollow echo of his own footsteps. Christmas lights twinkled in shop windows, couples laughed under lampposts, and children pointed at toys behind frosted glass. He had paid for most of the decorations on this block through his company's sponsorship, yet no one would guess that the man in the long black coat head, bowed against the wind, was the same billionaire whose name lit up the skyline. When he reached Boston Common, the laughter faded, replaced by the faint cry of the wind and something else. A sound so small he thought he imagined it. A whimper. He stopped. Under the pale glow of a street lamp, a little girl was curled on a snow-covered bench, hugging a threadbare bunny doll. Her hair was tangled, her cheeks red from the cold, her shoes far too thin for the weather. For a moment, Ethan froze. She looked like a dream too fragile to touch. Then instinct took over. He knelt beside her, his breath visible in the icy air. "Sweetheart, where are your parents?" he asked softly. The girl stirred, blinking up at him with wary brown eyes. "They went to heaven," she whispered. "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers." Ethan felt something twist in his chest, an ache he hadn't felt in years. Then, maybe tonight, he said gently, "I can just be your father." The words slipped out before he could stop them. The girl's eyes widened in disbelief, then fear. She clutched her bunny tighter. Ethan raised his hands slowly. "You're safe," he said. "I'm not here to hurt you." She studied him for a long moment, as if measuring the truth in his face. Finally, she whispered, "I'm Lila." Her voice was barely a breath. He smiled an unfamiliar trembling smile and shrugged off his cashmere coat to wrap it around her shoulders. She shivered under the warmth, her small hands disappearing in the folds of expensive fabric. They walked together through the empty park, the snow crunching beneath their feet. Ethan tried to ask questions, but Lila spoke only in fragments. Her mom had worked at a bakery, then got sick. They lost their home. Lila had been staying near the church downtown until it closed for repairs. She'd come to the park because she liked the Christmas lights. Each sentence was a blade cutting through the armor he'd built around his heart. When she coughed, he realized just how cold she was. Without thinking twice, he scooped her up in his arms. "You're coming with me," he said. "Just for tonight. You can't stay out here." Back at his penthouse, the automatic doors slid open to reveal a space of glass marble and silence. The contrast was almost surreal. The warmth of the room, the hum of hidden machines, the little girl blinking at chandeliers like they were stars. Ethan carried her to the couch near the fireplace. "Hungry?" he asked. She nodded, eyes wide. Within minutes, he'd microwaved soup, something he hadn't done for himself in years. As she ate, he noticed how carefully she used the spoon, afraid to spill a drop. "You can eat as much as you like," he said. "There's plenty." She looked up, hesitant. "For free." He swallowed hard. "For as long as you want." When she finished, Lila wandered to the tall window overlooking the city. Her reflection shimmered against the skyline lights. "It's pretty," she said, "but it looks lonely." Ethan didn't answer. She turned and pointed to a framed photo on the table, a teenage girl smiling beside him. "Is that your daughter?" He nodded slowly. "Ava, we haven't spoken in years." Lila tilted her head. Maybe she's lonely too. The simplicity of her words hit harder than any business failure ever had. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt tears sting his eyes. He fetched a blanket and tucked her in on the couch. As she drifted to sleep, her small hand reached for his. "Thank you," she murmured, "for not walking away." He sat there watching her breathe, the crackle of the fireplace filling the silence. In that quiet moment, he realized how strange it was that a man who could sign billion-dollar deals felt more alive holding the hand of a child he'd just met. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the city in white. Somewhere, in that vast, glittering night, a lonely billionaire and a homeless little girl had found each other. And though neither knew it, yet this Christmas Eve would change both of their lives forever. Morning light filtered through the tall windows, spreading a soft gold across the marble floor. Ethan Marshall had barely slept. The image of the little girl shivering on that park bench had replayed in his mind all night, along with her fragile voice. They went to heaven. He looked toward the couch where Lila slept, curled beneath his blanket, her small hand clutching the bunny doll. The world outside was silent, except for the whisper of the snow against the glass. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel empty. It felt fragile, alive, and unfamiliar. He brewed coffee and quietly heated milk for her, unsure what kids liked these days. When she finally stirred, blinking against the sunlight, she sat up quickly, looking around as if she'd dreamed everything. "Good morning," Ethan said softly. She rubbed her eyes and stared at him confused. "You're still here," she said, almost surprised. He smiled. "So are you. That's a good start." She hesitated, then nodded shyly. He made pancakes, burning the first batch so badly the kitchen filled with the smell of smoke. Lila giggled a real laugh this time. "You're not very good at that," she said between laughs. Ethan grinned, flipping the next one better. "Guess I'm out of practice. My daughter used to help me. Maybe you can show me how it's done." Her eyes lit up as she joined him, standing on a chair to reach the counter. Together they managed something edible. When she took the first bite, she closed her eyes and whispered, "It tastes like home." Ethan froze for a moment before saying quietly, "Then we did something right." As they ate, she kept glancing around at the walls, at the high ceilings, the quiet machines, the art pieces that looked too perfect to touch. "Is this really your house?" she asked. "Feels like a museum?" He chuckled. "Yeah, sometimes I forget to live in it." She tilted her head. "Don't you get lonely?" The question hit deeper than he expected. "Every day," he admitted. "What about you?" Lila shrugged, stirring her syrup. "I don't remember not being lonely." After breakfast, she explored the penthouse carefully, like someone walking through a dream she was afraid might vanish. She paused at the grand piano in the corner and pressed a key. The note lingered in the air like a secret. "Can you play?" she asked. A little Ethan said. He sat beside her, letting his fingers find an old tune his mother used to hum at Christmas. Lila swayed gently, then started humming along. For a brief moment, time felt suspended. Just a man, a child, and a melody that didn't need words. When the music stopped, she reached into her worn backpack and pulled out a folded paper. "I made this last night," she said, handing it to him. It was a crayon drawing a tall man holding hands with a small girl under a giant snowflake. Above them she'd written, "Thank you for finding me." Ethan stared at it, his throat tightening. "This is beautiful," he said. "You even got my bad hair." She laughed softly. "You're not bad, just sad." He looked away, hiding a smile that trembled on the edge of pain. As the day went on, reality started creeping back. His AI home assistant integrated into the security system detected an unauthorized occupant and displayed a silent alert on the wall screen. Unregistered presence detected it, said in its calm digital voice. Ethan's chest tightened. He muted the system quickly, afraid Lila would hear. "She's my niece," he said to the microphone, improvising. "Override protocol for 48 hours. The system accepted the command and the screen went dark. For the first time in his life, Ethan lied to his own technology and felt absolutely right doing it. Later that afternoon, snow began to fall again. Ethan found a box of ornaments in a storage closet untouched for years. "Help me out," he asked. Lila's face brightened as they decorated the tree together. She hung one tiny paper angel near the top and whispered, "That's for my mom." Ethan nodded, hanging a silver star beside it. "And that one's for mine," he said quietly. She looked at him, and for the first time he didn't feel like a stranger to her. As the fire crackled, Lila dozed off beside the tree, the flicker of light reflecting on her small, peaceful face. Ethan sat across from her laptop, open, pretending to work, but unable to focus. Every time he looked at her, something shifted inside him, something old and human and terrifyingly real. He opened his email to compose a message to Child Protective Services, then stopped. His fingers hovered over the keys. What happens to her if I call? He imagined her waking up in a gray office, surrounded by paperwork and strangers. The thought made his stomach twist. He closed the laptop. Instead, he picked up her bunny from the couch. One of its button eyes was missing and the fabric was worn thin. He carefully stitched it with a thread he found in an emergency kit. When Lila woke later and saw it, she gasped. "You fixed her?" she said, holding the toy close. "She looks happy again." Ethan smiled softly. "So do you." She leaned against him, small and warm, and whispered, "Can I stay just one more night?" His answer came without hesitation, "As long as you need." That evening, they watched an old Christmas movie, sharing popcorn and cocoa. When the heroine on screen said, "Family isn't about blood, it's about love," Lila repeated it under her breath like a prayer. Ethan glanced at her and saw tears in her eyes. "Do you believe that?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "I think so." "Do you—" He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "I do now." By the time the credits rolled, the snow had stopped falling. Lila had fallen asleep again, curled beside him. Ethan turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of the tree. The city outside glimmered through the windows, cold and distant. But inside, the warmth felt real, something he hadn't known he was missing until that night. He tucked the blanket around her and whispered, "Merry Christmas, kiddo." The words caught in his throat, but for the first time in years they meant something. He stood there for a while, listening to her steady breathing before sitting down beside her again. And as the quiet settled around them, Ethan realized he wasn't alone anymore. By the next morning, Boston had shaken off its white silence and returned to its steady rhythm. Ethan drove through the narrow streets with a paper cup of coffee and the sound of Lila's quiet humming in the back seat. She sat, bundled in his coat again, her bunny toy tucked under her arm. She had drawn another map for him, colored in blue, crayon, shaky lines, leading from his building to an old part of town she called the Bakery Street. When he asked about it, her voice softened. "Mama used to work there," she said. "She made the bread smell like Christmas." The words lingered in the car like a ghost. They followed the directions until they reached Old Harbor Street, a row of boarded-up shops half buried in snow. The sign of one building hung crookedly, the paint faded but still readable, Marina's Bread and Love. Lila's breath caught when she saw it. "That's it," she whispered. Ethan parked and helped her out. The bell above the door no longer rang. It had rusted into silence. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old flour. Broken chairs leaned against the walls, and a calendar from 5 years ago still hung behind the counter. Yet, in the middle of all that decay, stood a child's drawing taped to a shelf, a woman with brown hair holding a loaf of bread, a little girl beside her. At the bottom, a scrawled name, Lila. Ethan crouched to her level. "Your mom drew with you here." Lila nodded, touching the paper gently. "She said one day we'd make a big bakery where everyone could eat even if they didn't have money." Ethan felt his throat tighten. The dream was childish and impossible, and yet somehow beautiful. While Lila explored the room, he pulled out his phone and searched the property records. The building had been abandoned 3 years earlier after Marina Dorsey, the owner, fell ill. Her obituary appeared on an old news site. His finger hovered over the contact link beside the name Mrs. Dorsey, sister and caretaker. He called. That afternoon, an elderly woman with silver hair and a wool hat met them at the site. "You must be Ethan," she said, her voice gravelly but kind. "And this must be the little angel Marina used to talk about." She knelt in front of Lila, her eyes softening. "Your mama loved you more than life itself." Lila didn't speak, but she pressed her face into Mrs. Dorsey's coat and began to cry. The woman held her close, whispering something only they could hear. Ethan stood back, letting the moment unfold. It was the kind of grief no amount of money could touch. When they stepped outside again, the wind had picked up scattering snowflakes like ashes. Mrs. Dorsey told Ethan how the bakery had been more than a business, it was a refuge. "Your fancy hotels serve wine and salmon," she said, "but Marina served kindness. People came here to feel human again." She looked at the broken windows and sighed. The city forgot this place. Ethan glanced down at Lila, who was tracing a heart in the snow with her boot. "Maybe it's time someone remembered," he said, quietly. That night, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the bakery. The warmth of it, even in ruins, had felt more like home than his entire penthouse. After Lila fell asleep, he sat at his desk and started making calls to contractors, to his financial manager, to the zoning board. By midnight, he had purchased the property outright. The next morning, he drove Lila back to Old Harbor Street and showed her the official deed with her name written on the bottom as co-founder. "What's that mean?" she asked, eyes wide. "It means Ethan said this is your bakery now. We're going to bring it back." Over the next few weeks, workers arrived with tools and heaters. Ethan handled permits and budgets, while Lila, armed with colored pencils, drew designs for the new sign. She wanted the same name as before, but with one small change, Lila's Light Bread and Love. "Because Mama said bread feeds the body," she explained, "but love feeds the heart." Ethan nodded, pretending not to wipe his eyes. He hadn't felt this kind of purpose in years. Not since before his divorce, before he started measuring his worth in stock prices. One afternoon, while supervising the renovations, Ethan caught Lila staring through the window at a group of kids playing outside. She didn't move, just watched, holding her bunny tightly. "You can go join them if you want," he said. She shook her head. "They have moms waiting for them. I don't want them to ask where mine is." He crouched beside her. "You don't have to answer that. You can just tell them you're working on something special." She smiled faintly. "Like fixing hearts, exactly," he said. "Starting with mine." When the bakery was finally ready to reopen, Ethan threw a small gathering. The scent of fresh bread filled the air, mingling with the hum of conversation. Neighbors came, old regulars returned, and Mrs. Dorsey cut the ribbon herself. Lila stood behind the counter in a white apron, several sizes too big, proudly serving cookies to anyone who asked. Every so often, she'd glance up at Ethan, who stood near the window, talking with the reporter. He caught her gaze, and for a fleeting second they smiled at each other the way families do without needing to explain it. Later that evening, after the crowd had gone, Lila climbed onto one of the counters, her legs swinging. "Do you think Mama can see this?" she asked. Ethan looked around the room, the glowing ovens, the shelves of bread, the laughter that still lingered in the air. "If she can," he said softly, "she's smiling." Lila nodded, then pulled out her bunny and placed it on a small shelf beside the register. "Then I'll leave her a seat." The simple act pierced him. It wasn't charity anymore, it was love pure and unspoken. When they locked up that night, Ethan turned off the lights and looked back at the sign above the door. The golden letters shimmered faintly in the streetlight, Lila's light. He took her hand and started walking toward the car. "You know, he said when I was your age I thought being rich meant never needing anyone." She looked up at him, sleepy but curious. "And now," he smiled, "now I know being rich means having someone to walk home with." The snow began to fall again as they drove away, coating the streets in white. Lila fell asleep in the back seat, her head leaning against the window, the glow from the bakery sign fading behind them. Ethan glanced at her reflection in the mirror, and something inside him settled. He had bought buildings, companies, even islands, but tonight, for the first time, he'd helped rebuild something that truly mattered, a promise made by a mother to her child. And in that quiet realization, Ethan Marshall, the man who once owned half the city, finally understood what it meant to feel full. By the time spring sunlight began to warm Boston's streets, Lila's light had become more than a bakery. It had become a small miracle. Families lined up on weekends, old neighbors returned with stories, and Ethan watched from behind the counter with quiet pride as Lila handed out loaves of bread tied with red ribbons. She was radiant, laughing freely, now her eyes full of life. For the first time in years, Ethan felt peace, until peace gave way to something colder: exposure. It started with a single photo. A bystander had taken a picture of Ethan kneeling beside Lila at the bakery, opening the caption reading, "Billionaire adopts homeless girl, no paperwork, no plan." Within hours, tabloids and social media tore the story apart. Rich man's publicity stunt or illegal guardianship headlines screamed across morning shows. Ethan's phone buzzed endlessly. Board members called lawyers, texted, and an emergency meeting appeared on his calendar before noon. He stared at the screen, unable to move. When the Child Protective Services officers arrived at his penthouse that evening, Lila was coloring by the fireplace. "Mr. Marshall," the woman said gently, "we've received concerns regarding your custody arrangement." Her tone was professional, but her eyes flicked around the marble room as if searching for evidence of guilt. Lila froze, clutching her bunny. Ethan stepped forward. "She's safe here," he said firmly. "I've provided everything she needs." The younger officer shifted awkwardly. "That may be true, sir, but legally she's still a ward of the state. We have to take her into temporary care until this is reviewed." The words sliced through the air. "No," Lila whispered, backing away. Ethan knelt beside her. "It's just for a little while," he said, though his own voice trembled. "I'll fix this, I promise." She looked at him, eyes wide with fear. "You said no more cold nights." He could barely breathe. "And I meant it," he whispered, brushing her hair back as they led her away. The elevator doors closed before he could say another word. The silence that followed felt worse than any failure he'd ever known. The next morning, Ethan's face was everywhere. TV anchors debated his motives, his company's stock dipped 5%, and reporters gathered outside his building. He shut off the screens and sat alone at the piano, his hands motionless on the keys. For years he'd lived through corporate storms, but this was personal. The phone rang again, and this time he answered. "Dad." The voice was hesitant, almost fragile. It was Ava, his daughter, the one he hadn't spoken to in nearly 4 years. "I saw the news," she said. "What are you doing, Ethan? Trying to fix your past with someone else's kid?" Her words hit hard, but underneath them he heard something unexpected. Worry. "I'm trying to do the right thing," he said quietly. "You don't know her." "Lila's a child," Ava interrupted, "and she needs someone stable. Are you sure you're not trying to make up for not being there for me?" The line went silent. For a long moment, Ethan couldn't answer. Finally, he said, "Maybe I am. But that doesn't mean she doesn't deserve a father who won't give up on her." There was a pause, softer this time. "Then fight for her," Ava said, "but do it the right way." That night, Ethan contacted Grace Coleman, a child welfare attorney known for her compassion. She listened carefully as he explained everything from finding Lila in the snow to restoring the bakery. When he finished, Grace leaned forward. "You broke a rule," she said. "But you did it for the right reason. We'll make that clear to the court." Over the next few days, Ethan gathered every document, photo, and witness statement he could find. Mrs. Dorsey agreed to testify about Lila's care. The bakery employees wrote letters describing his devotion. Even Ava surprised him by submitting her own written statement saying her father had learned how to love again. The hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning. The courtroom was small, bright, with sunlight that made everything seem harsher. Lila sat near the front with the social worker, her bunny tucked under her arm. When she saw Ethan enter, her face lit up, but she didn't run to him. She waited quiet and brave, as if she understood this moment was bigger than either of them. Grace spoke first, describing how Ethan had provided not just shelter but stability, community, and belonging. The opposing counsel focused on procedure, arguing that wealth did not excuse breaking the law. Ethan listened, hands clasped, his heart pounding in his chest. When it was his turn to speak, he stood and faced the judge. "I'm not here because I wanted a headline or a symbol," he said. "I'm here because on Christmas Eve I met a little girl who reminded me what being human means. I didn't plan to become her father. I just couldn't walk away. I've made mistakes, Your Honor. I wasn't always the man I should have been to my own family. But this time I won't fail, not her." His voice cracked on the last word. For a long moment the room was silent. Then the judge nodded slowly. "The law requires structure, Mr. Marshall," she said, "but it also recognizes love when it sees it." Before she could continue, a small voice broke through the quiet. "Your Honor," Lila said, standing on trembling legs. "He already is my dad." Gasps rippled through the room. The judge's expression softened. "Come here, sweetheart," she said. Lila walked to the bench holding her bunny. "He fixed her eye," she said proudly. "He fixes hearts, too." The decision came minutes later. Temporary guardianship granted pending full adoption review. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding as Lila ran into his arms. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse, but he didn't care. All that mattered was the warmth of her small arms around his neck and the whisper in his ear. "Told you you'd fix it." That evening, they returned to the bakery. The staff had hung a handmade sign over the counter that read, "Welcome home, Lila." She twirled beneath it, laughing. Ava arrived quietly, hesitant at first, then smiled when she saw them together. "She's smaller than I imagined," she said, "but I can see why you fought for her." Ethan looked at both of them, the daughter he'd lost and the one he'd found, and felt something mend inside him. "Guess I finally got this father thing right," he said with a shaky grin. Ava nodded. "Took you long enough." And when Lila reached up and grabbed both their hands, the three of them stood there, the lights of Lila's light glowing behind them, a family imperfect, unexpected, but finally whole. 3 months passed, and Boston settled into another December, softer this time, as if the whole city had exhaled. Lila's light glowed like a beacon on Old Harbor Street. Every morning, the scent of warm bread drifted through the air before sunrise, and by noon laughter filled the shop. Ethan stood behind the counter sleeves rolled up dusted with flour. To the regulars, he was no longer the billionaire from the news. He was the man who remembered their names, who poured coffee and asked about their families. What had begun as a rescue had turned into a home, not just for Lila, but for everyone who walked through those doors. On a quiet afternoon, Lila sat at a corner table with her homework spread out, her bunny perched beside her. A silver bracelet glimmered on her wrist. Ava's Christmas gift, a small charm shaped like a loaf of bread. For good luck, Ava had said. The two had become inseparable over the past months. Ava tutored her in math, took her ice skating, and helped her pick out books from the library. Watching them together, Ethan often wondered how something broken could mend into something even more beautiful. That day, as the last customers left, Mrs. Dorsey stopped by, carrying a basket of cookies. The judge's office called, she announced with a grin. It's official. The adoption's finalized. For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. Lila's pencil dropped from her hand and her eyes went wide. Does that mean... Yes, sweetheart, he said, kneeling beside her. You're mine now, forever. She threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying all at once. Mrs. Dorsey wiped her eyes. You two were meant to find each other, she said. The rest of us just got lucky to witness it. That evening, they celebrated the only way Lila knew how, with cookies, hot cocoa, and too many lights strung across the bakery windows. Customers who'd become friends joined in, bringing flowers and cards. Ethan gave a small toast. This place was once just a dream on paper, he said. But this little girl reminded me that dreams don't fade. They just wait for someone brave enough to believe again. He looked down at Lila, and she believed for both of us. As the days led to Christmas, preparations filled every hour. Ava handled the decorations. Lila planned a kindness tree where people could hang handwritten wishes for others, and Ethan coordinated deliveries of bread to shelters across the city. Reporters still tried to revisit the billionaire and the homeless girl story, but Ethan declined interviews. He told them the same thing every time. This isn't about charity, it's about family. Those words found their way into local papers, anyway becoming something of a motto for the community. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year since that first snowy night, Ethan woke early and walked to the bakery before sunrise. The street was quiet, the sky still bruised with the last of the night. Inside, he turned on the lights. The shelves gleamed, every loaf neatly wrapped, every cookie iced with care. He paused at the counter where Lila had placed her bunny the day before, now displayed beside a small plaque that read, "For every child who just needed one more chance." He ran his fingers over the words, feeling the weight of everything that had changed. The door opened softly behind him. Couldn't sleep. Ava's voice carried a teasing warmth. She was holding 2 cups of coffee steam curling in the cold air. You always did like to work on Christmas, she said. Ethan smiled. Old habits. But this one's worth it. They stood together watching the sunrise through the window. You know, Ava said you're a better dad now than you ever were when I was a kid. He looked at her, startled. She shrugged. Don't look so shocked. I mean it, you finally learned how to show up. He exhaled slowly. Guess it took me losing everything to learn what really mattered. She nudged him gently. You didn't lose everything, Dad. You just started over. Later that morning, Lila burst through the door wearing a red scarf, her cheeks pink from the cold. The church people are coming, she announced, grinning. Behind her, a group of volunteers carried boxes for the Christmas charity drive. The bakery buzzed with movement and warmth. Ethan watched her run from table to table, helping everyone laughing like she'd never known fear. He remembered that first night, the bench, the trembling hands, the voice whispering about heaven, and for a fleeting second he saw both versions of her at once, the child who had nothing, and the girl who now had everything she needed. By evening, the bakery transformed into a small celebration. Candles flickered on each table, the air thick with cinnamon and music. Families gathered to share food and stories. A man who had once slept in his car came in with his 2 kids, handing Ethan a note. "Your bread saved us last winter. Thank you for giving us warmth when no one else would." Ethan folded it carefully and slipped it into his pocket. When he turned, he saw Lila on the small stage near the window, nervously holding a microphone. "I just want to say thank you," she said, her voice trembling, "for everyone who helped us. My mom used to say love is the only thing that doesn't run out." She was right. Merry Christmas. The room erupted in applause, but Ethan couldn't move. He just stood there, his heart full. After midnight, when the crowd had gone and the lights dimmed, Ethan locked the door and walked outside with Ava and Lila. Snow had started falling again, soft and silent. "Can we go see the tree?" Lila asked, pointing to the Boston Common across the street. They crossed the quiet park, the lights shimmering against the snow. The giant Christmas tree sparkled in front of them, colors reflecting in their eyes. Lila reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. "What's that?" Ava asked. "A promise," Lila said. She handed it to Ethan. Written in careful handwriting were the words, "No more cold nights. Ever." He crouched down, his eyes stinging. "You kept your promise, kiddo," he said softly. "No," she replied, smiling. "We kept it together." She reached out and took his hand, then Ava's, linking them both. The 3 stood there under the falling snow, the lights painting their faces in gold. For a long time, none of them spoke. They didn't need to. Everything that had once been broken was whole again. Later that night, back at the bakery, Ethan placed the note in a small frame beside the bunny and the plaque. Above it, he wrote 2 words, "The Christmas Promise." It wasn't a brand or a slogan, it was a reminder. A reminder that sometimes the greatest gifts aren't bought or wrapped, but found in moments when you choose love over fear, hope over comfort, and family over everything else. As he turned off the lights, the bakery glowed softly from the street like a candle in the dark. And in that quiet warmth, Ethan Marshall finally understood he hadn't just saved a child that night in the snow. She had saved him too. When the snow finally melted from the streets of Boston, Ethan Marshall's life looked nothing like it had a year ago. The man who once walked alone through silent penthouse halls now woke each morning to the smell of cinnamon bread and the sound of laughter echoing through Lila's light. He had gone from a man defined by success to one redefined by compassion. Lila, once a frightened child on a frozen bench, had become the beating heart of his world, his daughter in every sense that mattered. And Ava, his estranged child, had returned not because of guilt or obligation, but because she saw in her father a man transformed, someone capable of real love. Together, they built something that no fortune could buy, a family bound not by blood, but by grace. Their story reminds us that life's turning points rarely come wrapped in comfort. Sometimes they arrive as a cry for help in the dark, as a small hand reaching out on a cold night. Ethan's redemption wasn't found in wealth or reputation. It was found in choosing kindness over convenience, in realizing that love begins the moment we stop looking inward and start reaching outward. The Christmas promise they kept was never about gifts or miracles. It was about the courage to care, even when it costs us everything familiar. In our own world, where loneliness hides behind busy schedules and success often drowns out humanity, Ethan and Lila's journey is a reminder that the smallest act of compassion can ignite extraordinary change. Maybe the next time you see someone struggling, or you feel your own heart growing numb, you'll remember this story that one simple yes to kindness can rewrite an entire life, including your own. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support helps us bring more stories of hope, love, and redemption to light. Stay with us, and together let's keep spreading warmth in a world that needs it more than ever.